In the God of War saga, there are many enemies and bosses that we face throughout the story. Some are easier, others more difficult, and some of which give you a good headache. Let's talk then about the 4 most difficult bosses, in my opinion, within the entire saga, and why they are much more difficult to defeat than the rest. I clarify that there will be spoilers about the story and its characters, as expected, so if you have not yet played any of the God of War titles and were planning to do so, you are warned. Starting with the list, in God of War Ragnarok, Hrolf Kraki is positioned as a formidable opponent, with quite a few attacks and really difficult to defeat. He is the king of all berserkers which we face within the game in the various kingdoms. In order to face him, we must first go one by one, killing the other berserkers scattered around the map. This enemy can defeat us with just 3 hits, which makes it essential to correctly handle blocks and dodges within combat. This boss takes all the mechanics of his other berserkers and uses them against you. That is why you must be attentive to all of his attacks, having previously learned from his other warriors to be able to face him in the end. Once you know his attacks and abilities, he becomes a little more bearable, but that doesn't mean that in general, it is a very difficult fight. In my case, to beat him, I chose to learn the timing of his attacks to block and dodge him, and I stood quite far away from him, waiting for him to attack me, and when he did, hit him with everything. But even so, it was a great challenge. Continuing with the list, also in God of War Ragnarok, throughout the story we will be able to meet some Valkyries who cross our path. First with Freya when she attacks us by surprise in the house of Kratos and Atreus, where we will have to fight to a duel against her, without it being something too complicated, to in the end let her know that we are not her enemies. Until the other 2 Valkyries that Odin sends to stop us before the attack against Asgard, closer to the end of the game, where they are a little more difficult to defeat, but not very complicated either. With a little strategy and good attacks, you can defeat them without a problem, leaving us with a very epic scene of Atreus and Kratos. The thing is that there is another Valkyrie that we can face, and she is not as such in the story missions, and she is undoubtedly the most difficult to defeat within Ragnarok. This enemy is called Gna, and she is the new Valkyrie Queen. She put all her loyalty in Asgard and Odin, turning her back on Freya since in the past they were great friends and one of the best confidants. However, Gna sees Freya herself as the one who turned her back on her. After defeating her, at the end of the fight, Gna makes the decision to want to die at the hands of Freya herself, accepting her fate without hesitation. To face her, we must travel to Muspelheim, and let me tell you, this Valkyrie is also difficult to defeat. It is advisable to face her with the most improved weapons and armor, and if possible, with a resurrection stone, since it can make a difference when it comes to defeating her. Here, like the Berserker, you will have to be very clever when blocking and dodging, but even more clever when attacking. You will have to use her runic attacks and abilities most of the time, where I think being aggressive is the best strategy to follow against her, but at the same time, you must be attentive to each of their movements and attacks. Without a doubt, it is a very difficult enemy to defeat, especially due to its unexpected attacks and the Bifrost, which makes its attacks much more lethal, and where, if you are careless, you can end up defeated very quickly. But if you follow the steps I told you before, you won't have a problem after a few tries. Let's now move on to one of the most iconic and difficult enemies, as expected, Zeus himself in God of War 3. Zeus, wielding the power of lightning and the authority of the gods, represents the old order, the dominion of the divine on earth. His mastery is challenged by Kratos, a mortal who ascends to godhood through the sheer force of rage and determination. This represents this fight for me, and that's why I love it so much. This battle has several phases, where in each one, the mechanics and confrontations change, and are very unique from each other. In general, the battle is quite challenging, which is logical if we take into account the history and the magnitude of the character and everything he represents for Kratos. It's a fight that I love, although it is a bit heavy. Although that does not mean that it is a very iconic and memorable one within the saga, Zeus being undoubtedly one of the most difficult bosses we must face, epic without a doubt. And finally, in last place, who I consider to be the most difficult in the saga, even more than Zeus, mechanically speaking of course, is Sigrun, as many expected. This boss is found in God of War from 2018, and I can say that since I have played video games, I have never doubted my abilities as much as I did in this battle. But this boss made me rethink certain things, and I even thought that it was not possible to beat him. However, like everything, once you manage to learn his attacks and movements, things change a little, but even so, it doesn't mean that she is very difficult to defeat. And to beat it, you will surely have to repeat the combat several times until you master the mechanics. I had to be attentive to each of his small movements to anticipate his attacks, since they are very different from each other, and the worst thing is that their attacks are very fast. with a reaction time of milliseconds, positioning himself without a doubt as the most difficult boss, in my opinion. And as in the case of the Berserker, you must first defeat a large number of Valkyries to be able to face Sigrun at the end. The fact is that if you want to free all the Valkyries, even Sigrun, you must kill them, and end this plot and everything that it entails. Even with God of War Ragnarok, where by the way Sigrun appears, luckily in this case without attacking us, and a large number of new enemies, Sigurd has one of the most difficult mechanics to face within the God of War saga, where you must use absolutely everything, and I'm not lying, everything that you have learned throughout history. Talismans, runic attacks, blocks, and many other mechanics to even be able to deal with it. Of course, there are a few other enemies that are quite complicated to defeat in the saga, including some dragons, elves, and other gods, but none compared to these four as far as I'm concerned. Let me know in the comments which ones you consider the most difficult, and remember to leave me a like and subscribe to support the channel, as well as activate the bell and be aware of new videos. Until next time.